What do you think of in your mind's eye when you hear the word veteran? What images come to mind? What do you think of when you hear that word veteran? Hello, my name is Steve Seroka, and by the end of this presentation, I guarantee you will have a new way of thinking about veterans, one of the most misunderstood communities we have around us. I've had the pleasure of serving 30 years in the United States Air Force. I was an active duty fighter pilot. I got to do strategic thinking, and I was also allowed to lead. And I've taken that experience, and I was part of Nevada's largest business organization, and now I'm the vice chairman for the state of Nevada's employer support for the Guard and Reserve, and I'm on several other veterans organizations. So let's get started. What are you seeing in your mind's eye now when you are thinking of the word veteran? I will share with you what those in our community have shared with me when they hear the word veteran. I have spoken to our elected officials, mayors. I have spoken to business leaders, CEOs, presidents, hiring officials, supervisors, and managers. And the number one image they have in their mind when they hear the word veteran is homeless person under a bridge. The second most common image that comes to mind's eye is somebody with PTSD. Somebody that can't fit in, somebody that's either going to hurt them or hurt themselves. And the third most common response is, picture this. A soldier with a rifle over their shoulder, a rucksack on, marching in single file, looking at the feet of the soldier in front of them, not thinking, but only taking orders. That is so last century. I don't even know if it's last century. So let's take a step forward again and understand why we can have that kind of an image when we hear the word veteran. Because it's understandable once you peel back the layers of the onion. Next slide. Most importantly is only 2% of the nation's population has worn the uniform of the military services in the last generation of 25 years since Desert Shield, Desert Storm. And since Gulf War II, only 1% of the population has worn the nation's uniform. Contrast that with a single year, 1945. Over 9% of the nation was wearing its uniform. And during that 6-year war of 1939 to 1945, which is much shorter than our current war of over 15 years, over 12% of the nation wore the uniform. And that's not even counting the tens of thousands supporting the war effort. And coming out of that war, the United States emerged as a global superpower, which we were not before the war. In addition, these people ignited the greatest economic boom in the history of the world. And what do we call this generation today? We call them the greatest generation. And there seems to be something about that relationship with military service, especially when you compare that to other nations today that have compulsory military service and how they're performing in their countries today. Next slide. So who are these people in our military today? There are 2.3 million people wearing the nation's uniform. 40% of them are in the Guard and Reserve. Those, as you recall, are people that have a civilian job and a military job. And at any given moment, we have over 150,000 of our warriors assigned around the world, 40% of which are reserve component. In addition, we have over 10,000 in combat right now as we speak, and another 10,000 supporting them in combat zones. Next slide. So what are they doing out there? What are they doing deployed around the world for the rest of us? Well, for one, in the South China Sea, they are responsible for keeping the sea lines of communication open. Can you imagine if China or Russia had that responsibility? We've all seen in the Olympics, and we make jokes about, well, the Russian judge with an unfair score. So it is in our best interest to be the people ensuring that shipping continues throughout that region. In addition, the military is ensuring our strategic routes worldwide are open, our air, land, and sea routes. They're ensuring business can be conducted. And in addition, what you may not know is that when we don't have necessarily the best relationship with another country, but we would like to, the first people we send in to build that relationship is our military. And we build a military-to-military relationship. We develop a trust and we develop a set of standards. And then on that foundation, business then it commences. Business comes in and stands on the back of the military. And that happens worldwide. It is the military that enables our nation's business to be conducted in places outside of the United States. These people that we have doing these missions, these veterans, they're the best America has ever seen. They're faster, smarter, stronger than at any time in our history. You may not know they're vetted academically. They have to take a test. They're also vetted emotionally and psychologically. Basic training, while it's very physical, is really a psychological test for their ability to adapt, their ability to be flexible, their ability to bring and take on and synthesize new information in a new environment at a rapid pace. You may not know this. 7 out of 10 Americans aged 18 to 30 are disqualified from entering the United States Army. All due to the choices they have made, whether it's their diet, whether it's what they put into their body in the form of drugs, whether it's the choices they make with who they hang around with and the decisions they made socially, often encouraged by our culture. But it disqualifies them from serving their nation in uniform. See, in our nation, we hire warriors for culture, whether they're going to fit, whether they have the right mindset and the right attitude. And they're trained for tasks, much like the best business management manuals say you should do in your organization. Hire for culture. So where did this start? During the Cold War, NATO and the United States was vastly outnumbered by the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. There was no way possible for the Western nations to match the numbers of the Warsaw Pact. So instead, the United States had to undertake a different strategy. What they did was they decided, we're going to hire the best people, we're going to give them the best possible equipment. That equipment is no good if those people aren't given the best possible training, and they're going to have the best leadership the world has ever seen. And those leaders will be top to bottom, because we know that the person at the bottom needs to be a leader, and they need to understand that their actions and their decisions and their words affect the people around them. To top all that off, about 40 years ago, America turned to the all-volunteer force. Previously, there was a draft military, and then there was an all-volunteer force instituted in the 70s. And people said, that's a great idea in peacetime. How's that going to work in wartime? How are we going to get volunteers to go die and be willing to put themselves in harm's way for their country in times of war? Well, I think the last 15 years have dispelled any of those concerns. Next slide. In the process, and as a result of all of that effort, the United States military, according to Gallup, is the most respected institution in the United States of America. More respected than the president, more respected than the Supreme Court, Congress, law enforcement, our healthcare system. And while doing so, while being that respected, they're recognized by many around the world to be the most dominant organization in the world. Check that. The most dominant organization in the history of the world. You can look at the studies, they go all the way back comparing the United States military to the Roman Empire. Next slide. So let's take a look at some of these warriors. We're going to look at 5 categories. Let's start out with the 18-year-old right out of high school. 18 to 24 years old, this is their office. This is an 18-year-old in front of a $70 million tanker. Next slide. This is an 18-year-old in front of a $500 million B-1. They are responsible for that technology. They are responsible for ensuring that aircraft is ready to go. An 18-year-old responsible for that much technology, that much of our national treasure. Take that a step further. When a pilot steps out to that airplane with all their degrees and all their training, and they do the walk around the airplane, the most important check they make is they approach that 18-year-old and they say, Airman, if you were me, would you take that airplane? Oh my goodness. The responsibility of that right answer from that airman is incredible. And that airman knows that in the air. There's no pulling over. There's no calling AAA to get help. If they make a mistake, that airplane doesn't come home, and maybe the crew doesn't either. So that airman has to consider that even though their boss is pressuring them to get the airplanes airborne, because that's how they're rated, he has an obligation to that aviator. And whatever that airman says, the pilot is going to do. Sir, that leak underneath the airplane, not going to be a problem, take the airplane. Or, sir, that leak under the airplane, when you push the throttles up, all the oil is going to drain out of the engine. In 10 minutes into flight, your engine is going to seize. And that pilot takes that information and makes their final decision. As the final authority whether to fly that airplane that day, if the airman says they wouldn't take it, the pilot goes to that airman's boss and says, I'm not taking this airplane. The pilot doesn't blame or even mention that the 18-year-old said not to take it. It's the pilot's decision now. And that trust that is developed between that 18-year-old airman and the pilot has just grown immensely. And that trust and that teamwork carries and follows them the rest of their career. Now let's look at the next level. 24 years old, $300 million worth of airplanes in this photo. Next slide. 24 years old, approximately $2 billion in assets here. Nuclear bombers, nuclear weapons, and their support tankers, and all the equipment goes with it. At 24 years old, they're responsible for ensuring our nation's defense, the training of the people, the effectiveness of the equipment that is laid out for that mission for the day. Next slide. At 34 years old, 4 planes wide, as deep as the eye can see, $30 million F-16s. At 34 years old, responsible not just for those airplanes, but for every level of person underneath them. A person responsible for 6 airplanes, or a person responsible for 1 airplane. The training that goes with each of those levels. They're responsible for the supply chain management, the scheduling, the planning, the program management. They're leaders, they're supervisors, they're schedulers, they're planners. Their responsibility is immense. Next slide. Let's talk about the college graduate. Comes into the Air Force out of college, 22 years old, goes to flight school, and this is the office of a 22-year-old Air Force officer. A $30 million airplane. Technology beyond belief. Hanging on the wings, more technology. Understanding how all those pieces play together and interact. In addition, look outside the window of that officer's office. There are other airplanes. There are 4 $50 million airplanes in this photo. When there's a mission, there could be 4, 8, 12 of these $30 and $50 million airplanes leading the charge toward a defended target. Following behind there could be 10, 20, 50, 70 other airplanes worth hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions. They are responsible for understanding how the tactics work, how they're all going to work together, and it happens fast. When you're traveling Mach 1 in this direction, and the adversary is traveling Mach 1 right at you, you're closing at a rate of 1 mile every 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 1 mile, 1, 2, 3, 2 miles. There's no time for hesitation. And the consequences for the wrong decision are immense. And you have to make decisions not just for yourself, but for everybody around you. And then when you're done with that mission, you come home and you have a second full-time job. You see, an aviator is not just a full-time combat aviator. In addition, they have a full-time job to run their organization. They're the chief of planning, the chief of strategy, the chief of training, the chief of standardization and evaluation. Some of them are the COOs of their organization, and some of them are the CEOs of their organization. 2 full-time demanding jobs. Next slide. When our nation is told to go to war, somebody has to do all the planning. The president says we are deploying to a certain theater. It is the military that decides how much equipment, how it's getting there, and how to employ it. When it gets there, somebody has to figure out the strategy. And we have amazing people that develop the strategy, amazing people that develop the plan, and then we have amazing people that have to execute that plan, because we all know, regardless of how well you planned it, things will go wrong. In this room, this is the execution room. There are 500 to 600 computers on the floor. There are screens 30 feet tall by 80 feet wide. And at the desk of every one of those is an expert in that field, whether it's unmanned aircraft, strike aircraft, fighter aircraft, aeromedical airlift, airdrop. You have the nation's 3-letter agencies in the room. You have all of our allies from Canada, the UK, New Zealand. You have the UAE, Jordan in that room. And then you have a senior officer sitting behind the glass. And that's his team, or her team, to make sure when any of the airplanes in any one of the 20 countries that comprise a CENTCOM area of operations, they become that person's responsibility. And that team's responsibility for making it work right. Next slide. This is another office, Pentagon, Washington, D.C. 23,000 people in that office building. Responsible for a budget of $570 billion, impacting 2.3 million people. Okay, let's just take a quarter of that for the purposes of this discussion. Say the Air Force. There are 5,000 Air Force people in that building. The budget is $170 billion, and there's only 330,000 people they're impacting. Ask yourself, is there any business in your community like that? Yet we have people that do that every day. And if you'll notice on all of these slides, there's an end age. For purposes of discussion, let's just say no person can serve in the military longer than 30 years. At the end of 30 years, they say, thank you, now you have to go figure something else out to do. Can you imagine Jim Urin at MGM Resorts International? When he hit 30 years of adult work, he's told, Jim, you have to leave. And by the way, you can't take another job in an organization like this because none exist. So you have to go reinvent yourself. You have to go find a way to apply these skills you've learned at MGM somewhere else. Maybe you can get a security job somewhere. Just kidding, Jim. Next slide. Well, the truth is we have 16,600 U.S. military transitioning into our local communities every month. Here in Las Vegas, out of Nellis Air Force Base, just up the street, there's over 1,000 warriors transitioning into the community every year. And the Guard and Reserve are constantly looking for jobs in our communities. But are they staying here in Nevada? Well, according to a study that came out in 2015, I think the answer is obvious why our military, most don't choose to come here. Our state is 7th from the bottom when it comes to taking care of military retirees. Now, you hear the word retiree and that sounds old. The average officer retiree is 47 years old. The average enlisted retiree is only 40 years old. They're highly trained and they're eager and they're passionate and they want to dive into a community and make it even better. In addition, Nevada is the 5th worst state for veteran jobs. A veteran is anyone who's served in the military, not necessarily reaching the magic 20-year period in order to retire. Next slide. Well, when our warriors do go out into our community seeking employment, this is what they get. This is a lot of their experience. You have no industry experience. Well, of course not. I just came out of the military. But I have a lot of other experience, but we don't understand that experience. Or another very common reply is, you're overqualified. Well, what we've learned is that means we're a threat. But what they don't understand is a military person first needs to get started in the community, and they're not a threat. They want to make that boss the best boss in that organization because they want to be part of a winner. In our Guard and Reserve, especially here, you're not welcome. Not welcome? You say thank you. How come I'm not welcome? Because you may leave. You may get deployed and I may lose you, but I'll come back, I hope. I'd like to have my job when I come back. Well, we just don't want you. Next slide. When a veteran does get a job, according to Gallup, this is the workplace environment in America today. 7 in 10 Americans hate their job. Hate their job. 1 in 3 Americans is actively working against the purposes of their boss. Another 1 in 3 is just floating along, not contributing, but not detracting. And another 1 in 3 is actively engaged with the purposes of their supervisor. Next slide. Well, all of those things create an environment that a veteran is entirely unfamiliar with. You see, veterans want a challenge. They want something where they're going to win. They want their team to win. They want a problem such as how to best apply scarce resources. The definition of military art is the efficient application of scarce resources. Doesn't that translate directly into business? They want to be part of a greater purpose. They want to feel good about what they're doing. They want to feel part of an organization that is making a positive impact on the community. In addition, they want to feel empowered. They want to walk into an environment where they're explained, this is what we do here, this is what your part of our organization does here, and this is what you do. And we will help you get your feet on the ground, and we will help you get started. And then we will give you whatever you need to succeed. And last, they want a solid culture. Veterans expect it to be ethical and proper. They want it to be respectable. They don't want to be part of an organization that's cutting corners. They don't want to be part of an organization that makes claims they can't stand up to. They don't feel good about being part of an organization like that. They want it to be solid. Next slide. What happens to our veterans is, because the predominance of our culture in the United States was just described, and they try to make an organization better, but their boss is not used to having an engaged follower, and they're told to please, don't bring that up again. Please just stay in your office and do what we told you to do, which often they don't tell them what to do. They get frustrated. They get angry, and they feel they don't fit in. In fact, they're made to feel that all the world knows what's going on except them, that they're the crazy one. So as a result, they end up leaving and resigning. What happens as they resign is they feel that they don't fit in, and until they can realize they actually do understand. They actually do understand what it takes to be the most respected institution in the country and to also be the most effective organization in the country. Once they understand that, they can get their feet back underneath them and march on in the civilian community. But if they don't get that understanding, they tend to start that downward spiral that we hear about. They can start drinking and abusing other substances. But we don't want to go there. We want employers to understand how to deal with our veterans. If you want a strong performer, you want a dedicated performer, a team-focused performer, and an organization and a person that engenders trust and respect, you want a veteran. And if you want a veteran, allow them to help you accommodate each one of those areas. You see, no veteran wants to be hired out of moral obligation. No veteran wants to be hired out of pity. The only reason a veteran wants you to hire them is because you want to win, because veterans are winners. Thank you very much.